So this week, as we said, on Parshat Truma, where we think about what we each contribute and what we can build with it, and on Shabbat Shkalim, where we talk about the honest accounting for our funds and the stewardship of our money. It's my honor to invite up our treasurer, Cohen, who does a great job and an honest job stewarding our funds so that we can build things together to give words of Torah.
Thanks, Rav Jacob, for the introduction, and thank you for allowing me to do the Dvar Torah today. I think it's, as you mentioned, it's kind of appropriate given. But I mentioned before, this is a special Shabbat, and it's special for two reasons. One, we took out 3 Sifrei Torah, and this can only happen on 2 other Shabbatot in a year. That's one, and the other one. No, that's not Shabbat, unless you're in Israel. No, actually, the other one that could be 3 Sifrei Torah is the last of the special Shabbatot before Pesach, Shabbat HaChodesh. If that were on Shabbat, that would also be 3 Sifrei Torah. But since Shabbat HaChodesh and Shabbat Shkalim can't both be on Shabbat because one is the first Shabbat in Adar, one is the last Shabbat in Adar. They can't, Rosh Chodesh for 2 consecutive months can't be on the same day of the week. So you can have at most 2 Shabbatot where you take out 3 Sifrei Torah. And Jeff is correct on Simchat Torah. You do take out 3 Sifrei Torah, and if it's in Israel, it can be on Shabbat, but in Galut it can't. And also, as Rav Jacob mentioned, Shabbat Shekalim rarely coincides with Parshat Truma. And the last, as I mentioned before, it only happened 5 times in the last 150 years. The last time it happened was in 1994. And coincidentally, I was also treasurer of the congregation in 1994. Still? there were almost 30 years between, and the next time will be in 2045. And God willing, I'll be here, and God willing, I won't be treasurer. But one minute, say there's a common thread that follows through the Parshat Truma, the Torah reading for Shabbat Shkalim, and the Haftarah for Shabbat Shkalim, and Rav Jacob also alluded to it deals with the contributions for the building and the upkeep of the Mishkan and Temple and their stewardship, and it works in a kind of a progression. And start with the contribution of the Truma. We didn't read it today. We read it. It's the first part of the triennial, and we read it on Thursday morning. Actually, Ed, who was here, and Carol Shucker read it beautifully, and those of us who were here got to hear it. So the second verse talks about the Truma, and there's a lot of discussion about what the word Truma actually means. And Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch points out that word comes from the same root as the word to lift up. So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, always has to quote in Dvar Torah, says that it means that something you lift up it's something you lift up by dedicating it to a sacred cause. And he says you lift it up, and then it lifts you up. And again, actually, the literal translation of K'hu Truma, it doesn't say, it says to take gifts for Hashem. It doesn't use the word tnu, which would mean give gifts. It's K'hu, take them.
But in modern Hebrew, it's donation.
And I'm happy to take those donations.
Right. Okay.
Give to the new building, not for me.
Right. Yes. Okay. We'll go there later. And many of the commentators say that by giving to a sacred cause, in this case the Mishkan, and in our case another Mishkan which won't be moving, Jews gain more that they are giving. And there's a quote from Rabbi Mordechai Kamenetsky that says, "When you give with a true heart, you are not giving anything away. You are taking a share for yourself." In the Eitz Chaim, it talks about where the gifts came from. And they came from what was taken from the Egyptians at the Exodus. They weren't, and unlike most wars where you take spoils for yourself, in this case, the spoils, as it were, that the Jews asked for and got from their neighbors were essentially, the people were acting as kind of a pass-through. They were that Hashem meant them to give them to Bnei Israel to give back to Him when the Mishkan was built. And there's yet another interpretation of Truma, that it's not only a mitzvah to give tzedakah, it's also a mitzvah to accept tzedakah when you need it. And we'll talk about that a little bit later because it comes up again in Shkalim. And Rabbi Adam Greenwald says, generous giving and grateful receiving are essential parts of the sacred script of how we manifest God's presence among us. As we give and take, as we share and support, we sanctify our world, and we become God's agents in blessing one another. And at the end of this same sentence, it talks about, the Eitz Chaim translates it as, "You shall accept gifts from me, from every person whose heart so moves him." And it's clear from this that the contributions are to be voluntary. Each person gives as much as they're moved to give. We'll see later in Vayakhel, which we read in 3 weeks, that the people were so moved that Moses had to tell them to stop giving because there wasn't enough material to build the Mishkan. As Carly pointed out, we're not quite there yet for our fundraising campaign, but Halavai, we should be there. And Professor Eitan Fishbane of JTS talks about giving, and when we open our hearts with compassion and generosity, when we liberate ourselves from the enslavement of our egos and our need to self-protect, then we and those with whom we interact become truly elevated. And elevated as in Truma Leharim. And the theme of giving to the Mishkan continues for the next five verses, which is essentially a list of what is needed for the Mishkan, and it directs the people to bring what is needed. And it's interesting, all the commentaries on these verses from several different versions and translations that I've read all talk about the nature of the materials so that the reader can understand what these words. Rob Jacob talked about the same thing with the picture. This is trying to explain to a more modern reader what some of these materials were, because they either didn't exist or weren't accessible to somebody who was in, say, 13th century Germany. But a different question, which is, why was the list so specific as to what you want? Another interpretation, at least mine, would be that it reinforces that these gifts were to use for the Mishkan and only for the Mishkan. So it directs the people it gives a list of what we need. So people are moved to bring what is needed, and that they aren't supposed to be, and on the other hand, don't bring stuff that isn't going to be used. And that also helps that there's no chance that any of the leaders would misinterpret the people's intent, which is part of the subject of the Haftarah, that these gifts are all for Hashem, and they're for Hashem, they're for the sanctuary, for the Mishkan, and not for the leadership. Hashem isn't putting in a kleptocracy here. So, the summary is that the Mishkan was to be built through voluntary gifts that were accepted by honest leaders. So, the half shekel contribution in the special maftir was a little bit different. It's unlike you give what moved you, what you have. Everybody contributed the same amount, which is a half shekel, and what Jacob mentioned before, many of the commentators are talking about the equality, that all people are contributing the same amount for this because everyone is of equal value. And Rav Shimshon Paul Hirsch also says that the equal participation shows that all Jews must share in achieving the communal goals. And that an individual can't do it all alone. You must be part of the larger cause to have the greatest impact, which is why it's a half and not a whole. The Its Chaim has an interesting commentary on the word "dinatnu," which it will you and they will give. If you look at the word, if you look at the spelling in Hebrew, it's a palindrome: vav, nun, taf, vav. So it reminds us. This is coming back to the concept in Truma that that tzedakah is a two-way street, and the giver benefits from giving, also benefits from giving, and Vilna Gaon points out the giver, whoever's the person giving today may be the recipient in the future. And what Jacob talked about why we read it today, and in the present, there still is a present day custom that comes out of, even though there's no Mishkan to give it to, there is a present day custom that comes out of that, which is that on Purim we give matanot le'evyanim. We give according to Hertz and the Hertz Chumash, it's a half of the silver. The tradition is half of the silver coin of whatever the coin of the realm is that is supposed to be given tzedakah, and you know, Bonei Shalom's doing its Purim campaign right now, and a portion of the proceeds of the Purim campaign are designated to go to tzedakah, community tzedakah. So from here, we move now to the special Haftarah, which is talking about stewardship, and it talks about how the tradition of collecting a half shekel was continued. It wasn't only in at the first census that's talked about in Kitisa. It became an annual contribution that went to continued maintenance of the Mishkan, then the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem, and it was used for continued maintenance, as in the Haftarah was restoration, because it had under the previous queen, who was an idol worshiper, had been left to deteriorate, and but it also talks about the box with a hole in it that was. Can't take out because we have money in it and it's Shabbat, but there was a box with money, with a box for people to give voluntary contributions when they came to Shul. And for those of us who are here on Thursday mornings, we know that on Thursday morning there is a box with a hole in it that is put over here, and people give voluntary contributions for tzedakah for the community. And the Haftarah also kind of adds into the lesson of contributing. It adds in the lesson of following through and transparency and stewardship to make sure that the king and the Cohen Gadol made sure that the money was spent in the way that the givers intended it, and the Beit HaMikdash was actually restored and maintained. So, how does this relate to us as a congregation? As Carly mentioned, we're in the middle of a capital campaign to build a new building. So, as we said, in Truma, the building is funded by voluntary donations, and each member brings what their heart moves them to give. But, as I said before, we're not quite yet at the point in Vayakhel, so we will still gratefully accept what people's hearts move them to give. even though we're in the middle of a capital campaign, at the same time, we still need to maintain this current building and the community and the programs that it serves. And as in the and move on, this is the maftir for Shabbat Shalim. Each member pays dues to contribute to the upkeep and programming, which is how we are here in the sanctuary today, because that's what pays for it. And then the third piece of this continuum, which is the Haftarah, talks about how funds are collected and spent, and leaders are responsible for good stewardship of the money. The funds must be spent for the good of the congregation and the community without any appearance of impropriety, and the building and its and the programs inside it must be maintained in good condition and not allowed to deteriorate. And as Rav Jacob mentioned, I'm the treasurer of the congregation, and it's my responsibility as a treasurer to make sure that what is collected is spent in the way it is, as it is intended, and is collected and accounted for honestly and transparently, and spent in the way it's intended. And as I learned while preparing the Torah, this is not only a fiduciary duty, it's a spiritual responsibility to make sure that the congregation is maintained as the congregation, financially as well as with programming. And let's continue in the path shown to us in our Torah portion, our special maftir and haftarah, and maintaining, moving forward on the new building and maintaining where we are. Shabbat Shalom.
One, you said that you collect money on Thursday morning.
Yeah.
Does the group decide where the money goes?
Yes. Yes.
They do.
Yes.
And the other one is that when you were talking about how it's specific, it says that they have to need it. And from being on a couple of trips with AJWS, Luke Messenger tells a story about how so many times we see people and they need everything, you know, and according to our, we just, well, they need this, they need that, you know, and it's kind of important that they get to decide what they need. So I just thought that was really interesting.
I like that. Thanks. Francine, for those who were on the live stream, said that told the story from Ruth Messenger of the American Jewish World Service, that they'll go into communities and people have what people need a lot, and it's important for the people who need to decide what they need, rather than having somebody from the outside tell them what they need.
Shabbat Shalom.